Now with all the latest stories making the headlines this evening, it's the ITV News at 10.
It is unequivocally good news on an issue that has impacted the whole world. The war in Ukraine has had a massive impact on the global food chain, with consequences from the cost of living at home to potential famine abroad. On this, at least, there is an agreement with Russia tonight.
There is a beacon on the Black Sea, a beacon of hope, a beacon of possibility.
So what does it mean for all of us? We will try to get to the bottom of that tonight. Also on News at 10.
We have a clear shot if we move quickly.
Even by the standards of everything we know, it is simply staggering as the Vice President cowered in a basement, his security team fearing they were about to be lynched and sending messages to loved ones. The President still did precisely nothing to call off the mob, and even the next day still couldn't admit he'd lost.
This election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
The very troubling case of the suicide pact. Once on the brink of extinction, Chris has the heartwarming story of the gorillas back from the brink.
It's really hard to describe quite how amazing this experience is, to be this close to a species that was so endangered for so long.
Ever heard of the Shoe Kingdom? How a new discovery is being hailed as one of the wonders of the world.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The head of the United Nations described the agreement between Ukraine and Russia today as a beacon of hope. He wasn't sadly talking about a possible end to the war. That remains a distant prospect, but a deal which could help avert an imminent global food crisis. Under the agreement brokered in Turkey and signed separately by each side there, millions of tons of desperately needed Ukrainian grain will be released to the global market. Ever since the start of the war, people all over the world have been badly hit by the blockade of Ukraine's Black Sea ports, gateways to one of the world's vital breadbaskets. At home, it has contributed, of course, to the brutal cost of living crisis, but in many places it has pushed already desperate people to the brink of famine. Of course, the deal has yet to be implemented, and tonight President Zelensky said it is up to the West to make sure Russia keeps its word.
The invasion hasn't stopped everything. In central Ukraine today, the crops are still growing, but now there's hope the produce from these flowing fields might get to the people who need them the most. The deal was signed in Turkey this afternoon. It is the biggest diplomatic success story since the invasion 5 months ago.
Today, there is a beacon on the Black Sea, a beacon of hope, a beacon of possibility, a beacon of relief in a world that needs it more than ever.
Ports were blockaded and the water was mined around the Black Sea. This deal opens the way to significant volumes of commercial food exports from 3 key Ukrainian ports. It enables Ukraine to export around 20 million tons of grain and other agricultural products. The UN and Russia are due to sign a memorandum of understanding guaranteeing that grain and fertilizer cannot be affected by sanctions.
Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu.
For those hoping this means a peace agreement is around the corner, a reminder, both sides won't yet sit in the same room. It was only once the Russian minister had left the stage
Alexander Kubrakov
that his Ukrainian counterpart entered to sign another version of the same document. Far from the echoes of the artillery fire, this is Turkana in Kenya. Here last month, ITV News saw the human cost of the global food crisis. They too are victims of the Russian invasion. Here and elsewhere, including the UK, rising prices have been a consequence of the entrapment of Ukrainian grain. But there are still questions about how the deal will work.
How soon can it happen? How long does it need to take to clear the sea of mines to move this grain, 25 million tons of corn and wheat, through to the countries that need it the most?
This evening, President Zelensky of Ukraine said Russia might attempt to undermine the deal. But he said he trusts the United Nations to guarantee it. It's their responsibility, he said. Although Russia has agreed not to attack Ukrainian ships carrying grain, whether it sticks to that in the coming weeks will be seen as the real test of the potential for further diplomacy. Rohit Katru, News at 10.
So how likely is Russia to stick to its commitment to allow safe passage of Ukrainian grain, and does it signal new hope for wider peace talks between the two countries? Well, earlier today, John sent us his assessment from Western Ukraine.
Obviously, this is a positive development, the establishment of a safe maritime corridor through which Ukraine can resume crucial grain exports on which the poorer countries of Africa and the Middle East are absolutely dependent. The difficulty will be implementing this deal in practice. We've seen on land agreements on humanitarian corridors out of places like Mariupol. In practice, those agreements often broke down. And the maritime agreement will, of course, involve the Russian Navy backing off when it comes to its blockade of Odessa, but it will also involve the Ukrainians having to deal with the many mines they've laid there, and might getting rid of those mines amount to Ukraine lowering its defences. Perhaps the Russians might exploit that. So I think there are big trust issues. But a maritime truce, why not think about a land truce when we're talking about feeding the world? Most of this country's grain comes from the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia, where much of the fighting has been done. Imagine if some sort of truce extended there. It would be great if we look back at today as the beginning of the end, but let's see how it works out in practice.
John talking to us from Western Ukraine earlier. Now, just when you think you really have heard everything when it comes to former President Trump's behaviour on the day of the Capitol riot, from throwing food against the wall to trying to grab the steering wheel of the presidential limo, you get shocked all over again. The latest evidence to the January the 6th hearings painted a vivid picture of some of the crucial minutes. Vice President Pence is cowering in the Capitol building. His security team so convinced they're about to be lynched, they are passing on messages to their loved ones. And all the while, Mr. Trump did, well, absolutely nothing at all. According to one Republican congressman, Mr. Trump deliberately chose not to act.
Live on primetime TV, a hearing designed to convince America that over 3 critical hours, President Trump deliberately let violence unfold at the Capitol.
Donald Trump's conduct on January 6th was a supreme violation of his oath of office and a complete dereliction of his duty to our nation.
Oh, the building. Hold.
This is what he was prepared to ignore, hoping his supporters could overturn the election result, unmoved by the terror they were inflicting.
You may want to consider getting out and leaving now. Copy?
With the mob threatening to lynch the Vice President Mike Pence, his security team were desperate to get him out.
Well, if we're going to leave, we need to do it now.
Officers whose job was to protect the Vice President, fearing for their own lives too.
There were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the VP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
And where was the Commander-in-Chief, the sole person with the ability to stop it?
Donald Trump was in here watching events on Fox News, and new evidence gives a compelling insight into his state of mind, showing how he was calculating enough, argue the committee, to ensure there were no photographs, no diary entries, nothing to log how he failed to make a single call to anyone who might have helped.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
And over the coming days, there were no words of comfort either for the family of police officer Brian Sicknick, seen here walking away after being pepper sprayed by the mob. Hours after trying to wipe clean his eyes, he was taken to hospital, where he died. Donald Trump's closest aides shocked by his response.
Here's what they had to say about their boss. Murtaugh said, also not to have acknowledged the death of the Capitol police officer. Woking responded, that's enraging to me. Everything he said about supporting law enforcement was a lie.
I am absolutely disgusted with him.
The officer's family say Trump has blood on his hands.
He did nothing. He had staffers, he had family members, he had everybody surrounding him, imploring him to say, put a stop to this, and he refused to. He sat there for 3 hours and did nothing.
And yet, as all this unfolded, the committee heard the president had been repeatedly urged to intervene by aides and his family.
But this is now effectively a riot.
In a gripping moment showing Donald Trump recording a video the next day, it turned out none of them could persuade him to admit he'd lost either.
But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
As he mulls whether to run again for president, the committee is pulling out every stop to persuade America he should never be allowed to hold power again.
Well, frankly, for anyone who's been paying attention in these hearings, the idea that a man who behaved erratically and bizarrely on the best analysis and outrageously at worst could again be the leader of the free world must seem stupendously incredible. And yet it certainly remains a possibility that cannot be discounted. And tonight, one of his key advisers, Steve Bannon, was convicted of contempt. And Rachel joins me now to talk about all this and try and put it in some kind of context. Rachel, what are Americans making of it all?
Well, it's certainly all come at once for them today. The jury deciding that Steve Bannon, President Trump's longtime friend and ally, was guilty on 2 counts of contempt for Congress. Was really timely because he was a man who, though he wasn't working in an official capacity at the time of the insurrection in the White House, the committee had long suspected had been unofficially advising the president and his supporters, both in their plans to try and overturn the election result and to storm Congress itself. So he has made it very clear he plans to appeal against that verdict. But if he's unsuccessful, he will be sentenced in October. And of course, that leaves the question for all of America of whether President Trump himself might face prosecution. Certainly it's felt over the past few months like the committee has been laying out evidence, putting a framework in place, if you like, for a potential criminal prosecution. But that comes with all kinds of problems, not least that it could make President Trump a martyr. So the aim, I think, has become increasingly clear that what the committee wants to do is make sure America understands that he simply cannot be allowed to have a position of authority again. Have they managed to shift the dial on that? I'm not sure. The latest PBS broadcaster poll showing that over half of Republicans still think he's their best candidate for president in 2024. And given where Joe Biden's popularity ratings are now at an all-time low, that means the possibility still exists that despite everything we've seen and heard, he could serve another term.
OK, Rachel, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come back here. And with most schools broken up, it was one of the peak days for millions of families to pour onto ferries, roads and flights for their summer holidays. And especially given the state of the British travel industry over the past couple of months, it was always likely to be a difficult day, and that's putting it politely. The worst of it seems to have been in Dover, where cross-channel services were reduced to gridlocked chaos, with people caught in 6-hour queues, causing the port authorities to declare a critical incident. Tomorrow, we're being warned, could be even worse.
Just outside Dover this morning, the school summer holidays came to an abrupt standstill. The traffic was all heading in one direction, a 4-mile-long queue of cars crawling all the way to the port. Queue some understandably fed-up-looking children, adults desperate to stretch their legs, and yet somehow, after 6 hours of queuing, some were still managing to smile, despite the challenges.
Keeping her quiet, and then because she kicks off, I'm like, I don't know who to come down first, you know. I'm like, oh man, I didn't sign up for this.
We were supposed to be swimming by 4 o'clock this afternoon in our hotel, but I don't think we'll make it now.
Have you missed your ferry?
No. Yes.
We have missed the first one. I assume we've missed the second one. We're going to see if we can catch the third one.
Just want to get on my holiday. Just take it as it comes. It is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it.
But not everyone can afford to take that attitude. Authorities at Dover insist they did everything to prepare for the great summer getaway, but say that this situation was beyond their control.
It was all down to, or it is all down to, inadequate French immigration resourcing for the very early morning hours. We had requested for 14 officers to be on hand for the early hours of this morning. We only achieved 6.
But you run the port. When will this be resolved?
Regrettably, we have no control over the manning of the border authorities here in Dover.
The French authorities did send some more officers this afternoon, which appeared to help clear some of the backlog. But as post-COVID passenger numbers increase, finding border guards isn't the only challenge. Since Brexit, every single UK national going through this port has had to have their passport stamped. Now, stamping one passport might not take long, but multiply that by tens of thousands a day, and it really starts to add up. Those trying to get away to the southwest today may have also found themselves stuck, this time behind slow-moving convoys of fuel protesters on the motorway. There was at least some good news for air travellers after British Airways check-in staff called off a planned summer strike. But for those who booked a ferry this summer to avoid airport chaos, this must have been a sobering sight. And there has been no guarantee from anyone here at Dover that it won't look like this again tomorrow morning. Chloe Keedy, News at 10, Dover.
And I hate to say it, but the travel misery doesn't end there after talks to try to resolve the ongoing rail dispute broke down. This is definitely not the good news bit of the news bulletin. It means a strike next Wednesday by more than 40,000 rail workers belonging to the RMT union will go ahead. The strike is likely to cripple rail services across the country. And in a separate dispute, strike action is threatening to disrupt the delivery of GCSE and A-level results for thousands of school student staff at the AQA exam board are staging a 72-hour walkout over pay between July the 29th and 31st. Now, the latest official estimates suggest the number of people across the UK infected by COVID is still rising. And sorry not to have been here much this week. I've been recovering from a second bout of it, and it turns out so have many of you, because according to the Office of National Statistics, 1 in 17 of the UK population is currently thought to have the virus. That's around 3.3 million people and represents a rise of 7% on the previous week.
To many people, it feels as if the COVID-19 pandemic is becoming a thing of the past. But inside care homes like this one in Woking, all the signs are still there. Daily testing, staff wearing masks, and real fears about COVID rates rising again across the UK.
Society's opened up and gone back to normal, but life in care is still very different than it was pre-COVID.
The rates are really high again.
They are. It's very worrying. As a manager, it's given me sleepless nights, and it makes you anxious of what will happen in the future. Will we have more restrictions as infection rates go up?
Figures published today show just how fast COVID is rising. 3.8 million people are estimated to have the virus across the UK. That's a 7% increase on last week and the highest rate since April. It's most prevalent in Scotland, where around 1 in 15 have the disease. It's 1 in 17 in England and Wales and 1 in 20 in Northern Ireland. In Woking, a stark reminder that while COVID might be mild for most, it can hit some very hard, particularly older people, like 88-year-old Louise, who was hospitalised for 3 months.
And of course my girls weren't allowed in at all. They couldn't even say goodbye to me. They took me in isolation. I was completely out of it. But it's over now, isn't it? I'm on the mend. Sorry. Yeah.
As well as health fears are economic ones, as COVID disrupts businesses like this makeup studio in Manchester.
We're having last minute cancellations due to COVID. That kind of puts us behind.
you know, and we have everything sorted out, like the photographer, the stylist, makeup artist. It's really stressful.
So how should people behave in the face of rising cases, and should government intervene?
I think that government wants the economy to recover. I think that is the most important thing now for them. However, everybody has to make their own risk assessment. I still wear a mask because I have a vulnerable family member who isn't vaccinated yet, but that's me. I would say that, you know, maybe a mandate to go back to masking crowded indoor areas would be a good thing. But again, I don't make the laws.
And those who are making the laws seem unlikely to introduce new restrictions. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Next, a topic that's hard to think about, let alone discuss, but perhaps the remarkable exclusive interview we've been given will shed some light on the emotive issue of assisted suicide. Graham Mansfield, who's 73, spoke to us with moving candour after being given a suspended sentence for killing his wife in a failed suicide pact. He says his wife, Diane, asked him to end her life when things got bad after being diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Mr. Mansfield told us, "I knew I had to do it." He tried to kill himself too, but failed.
She was generous, loving, kind. There's not enough words to explain how great Diane was for me and meant everything to me.
Graham and Diane had just celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary when she was diagnosed with cancer.
Diane said to me, "When things get too bad for me, will you kill me?" And I said, "Yes, I will, Diane." We were in tears, you know. And I said, "Yes, I will, Diane, but on one condition, that I die with you." I said, "I can't live without you." It's as simple as that. And that's where we made our suicide pact.
He's just been convicted of her manslaughter, given a suspended 2-year sentence. He cut her throat, then attempted to take his own life.
I said to Diane, "Are you ready, Diane?" She said, "Yeah." So I did it. Every fibre of my body was telling me not to do it. But I knew I had to, the state that she was in. Told her I loved her. And then I said, "Well, Diane, it's my turn now."
He was cleared of murder and is now calling for a change in the law.
Euthanasia, you should be given an option. You need to have an option, because Diane, when she was diagnosed, was frightened. I've never seen her that frightened in all my life. You have the right to be able to turn round and say, "I've had enough and I want to die."
But this expert in palliative care strongly disagrees.
This seemed a particularly brutal manslaughter. It doesn't lead into euthanasia and assisted suicide. How does anyone expect our exhausted, compassionate doctors to carry the additional burden of deciding who to kill with lethal drugs? People need care.
The judge described this case as exceptional, but it raises familiar, fundamental questions. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
The plight of the mountain gorillas of Rwanda touched the hearts of people all over the world. It seemed these magnificent creatures were destined for extinction. But thanks to the work of naturalists like Diane Fossey and David Attenborough, and films, frankly, like Gorillas in the Mist, there's been an extraordinary turnaround. So much so that the reserve where they live needs to be expanded.
It was Africa's first national park, and the animals it was created to protect were once on the brink of extinction. But not anymore. The mountain gorillas are still considered critically endangered, but as we saw in Rwanda, their numbers are now growing. This is one family, the Amahoro family, which means peace. There are 22 of them, from the silverback, the boss, to the newest arrival, just a couple of months old. And all so vulnerable. When you come to see them, as we did, you need a negative COVID test and a mask.
It's really hard to describe quite how amazing this experience is, to be this close to a species that was so endangered for so long. I mean, there's one coming through just here, right by us.
There are more than 600 mountain gorillas on the Rwandan side, a conservation project now so successful the gorillas have run out of space. For years, humans have been taking the gorillas' habitat for farming, and the fields go right up to the current boundary of the national park. So Rwanda has decided to take it back, to reclaim the land for the gorillas.
60 years ago, this park, the habitat has been lost and it has never been covered. So now, thanks to the tourism, thanks to the conservation measures, we want to give back to the gorillas.
The plan is to increase the size of the national park by a quarter, but in return thousands of families will be forced to move.
Bazisatire dutema iki abapapa niyo batema ishamba bazisatira ko nta ujamo ngo aje kuzihiga zabaye nyinshi niba zarabaye nyinshi rero hakabonetse ubwo butaka.
The villagers have been promised new homes further away and compensation. It is a big ask. The project comes with a £250 million price tag, but these magnificent creatures are bringing jobs and vital revenue to this country. It's also a rare example of humans giving way to wildlife. Chris Ship, News at 10 in the Volcanoes National Park, Rwanda.
And there's more from Chris's encounter with those amazing animals, plus reports on refugees in Poland and the drought in Spain in the next edition of On Assignment. That's at 10:45 on Tuesday, and do watch. It's a fantastic programme, On Assignment. Now, finally, the unearthing of hidden treasures from an ancient civilization always provokes excitement. Think Egyptian pyramids or Inca gold, for instance. Now, new discoveries from the little-known Shu Kingdom, which thrived 3,000 years ago in China, are being hailed as a potential new wonder of the world.
Thousands of years ago, these remarkable masks were buried in southern China by a mysterious population whose relics could rewrite Chinese history. Some still have their original gold and are made with a level of craft and quality which exceeds anything else recovered in the country from the same period. And now archaeologists believe the items on display are a fraction of what still lies in the ground. 6 new sacrificial pits have been discovered containing 13,000 ancient artifacts and counting. Several objects dating back more than 3,000 years were unearthed almost completely intact. They are mostly made of bronze and jade, but gold and ivory were used in some of the most unique articles. The Sanxingdui remains were first found almost 100 years ago, but these latest discoveries have solved some long unanswered questions. There are experts from almost every scientific field involved in the analysis of these pits, and technology has allowed them to understand not only more about the relics themselves, but provided new information on everything from what kind of animals the people kept to what the weather was like thousands of years ago. Working in temperature-controlled units, it is meticulous work to excavate, catalogue and clean each piece. It's hoped each find will shed light on the people who left behind these treasure troves. They are believed to be from the little-known Shu Kingdom. Kneeling figures suggest they had a religion, and Indian seashells used as currency suggest a link with neighbouring nations. But with few written records, historians are still unclear how they lived and the purpose of their magnificent possessions.
神人这些反映古代人的他们的神话宇宙观、神话意识以及等等信仰的这些，能够和三星堆的出土器发生一定联系，可以触动我们去做进一步的探索。
It is the gold that glitters, but Sanxingdui gives us an incredible insight into Bronze Age culture. This is already one of the largest archaeological puzzles in China, and they are still finding missing links. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Sichuan Province.
And how about that? That's all we have time for tonight. I hope you have a really brilliant weekend. I will be back on Monday. I will see you then. Good night. Thanks for watching.